let's have a little look at some of the things we might need to fix just to perfect our design before we go and seal it by putting a finish over the top. Before we move on to our finishing touches, what we're going to want to do is just double check everything's how we want it to be with our design. Are there any little fixes we want to make, any little touch-ups before we effectively seal the surface with our finishes? So it might be that you've got a little bit of paint that's snuck under a bit of tape, particularly when you've got an open grain like this. It does sort of tend to happen. You might have just a little bit of roughness that you might want to sort out. You might have a bit of paint that's pulled up. It's quite easy to sort, and let me show you how. But don't worry about those mistakes, because it happens. The more intricate a design, the more heavily textured the surface you're working on, the more chance there is of being little errors, and especially when you're just starting out with these techniques. So really don't worry about it. Easy to fix, and I'll show you how. So where the paint has slightly gone into the tape here, I can use the blade of my knife to very gently, I'm going with the grain, just get rid of that, like that. Spotting any other little bits that I might need to sort out. And then I can see little areas where the paint has bled under the tape, and I have sealed it as well, but you know, these things happen. So I'm just going to use the point to flick down through the grain and remove those, just to clean them out. Like so. Sometimes if you've got quite a big bleed, the easiest thing to do is actually cut along the edge of the paint and then start to flick it off, and you should find it will come off a lot easier that way. So I can just cut and then go through the grain. If you've got paint where you've painted over a line and you've painted onto the background that you didn't mean to, just get a little tiny piece of sandpaper and rub that up and down the grain. What you can actually do to protect your paint surface when you're doing that is just pop a little bit of tape over the metallic. You don't want to scratch that, or your paint, whatever you've got in your design. So I'll just do that. And then I can take a little tiny piece of paper. This is 180, and I'm just going to sand back and forwards in the grain. Like that, to remove any over-painted areas, and then that should be fine to finish up. That's good. Let's take a look at the other door. Sometimes I even use my knife like a little plane. So if your painted areas are a little bit ridged and sticking up, you can actually just scrape the excess off very gently. I'm not leaning over the actual metallic, just on the edge to take that ridge off. You can even do it with your nail with some paints, just to make it feel a bit smoother. So if you've got a little bit of build up, you can just scrape that away. Like so. So I've got a little bit of, and this quite difficult area here, I've got a little bit of, I need to sort of maybe scrape back where it's been a bit difficult to control the tape over that area. And what I can do again is just put a little piece of tape down, just so I don't scratch the paintwork, and then go in there. And it just gives me a bit more room to manoeuvre to get rid of a nice clean line again. You can go a little bit across the grain, but try to keep most of your scrapes in line with the grain. That looks a lot better already. You might find also you need to go into some of these little areas where the tape has gone in and come over, just to take out a little extra bit of paint that might have snuck in there. Bearing in mind, we're human beings and, you know, this is not a machine finish. We just want to tidy it up so that visually your eye's not drawn to any little errors. But really, we also don't want to drive ourselves mad with it. So let's have a look at the drawers now. They're rather more painted and less wood on show. So I might need to do things in a slightly different way. So obviously where things bleed onto the paint, I can carefully scratch those back. But what I can actually do, because it's painted, is just touch it up with paint. So if I'd had a little bit of purple bleed onto the black here, I can just basically tape over the painted purple bit and touch it up with some black, like so. Very easy to do. Sometimes though, I actually just use a square flat brush and I just take that into the line like so, and you can just catch little bits that are peeking through like that, up and down. But the taping effect obviously is another good way of doing it. So either. Here I've got some little bits of paint peeping through here. So I'm going to mask those off. Carefully. Finding the original line but the opposite side of it. Make sure it's really smooth. And then the other side. And just repair that one little section. You don't have to obviously repaint it all, but with it being metallic, if the line went this way, I might actually continue it on because I don't really want separate layers, sort of showing the fact that I have touched up. And I wouldn't just touch up a small part of it like that, I'd do the whole line. It's actually hard to remember which way you've done it, remembering that metallics have to all be brushed in the same direction, so it's easier just to do the whole thing over the top with a fresh coat. So I do it all in the same direction. It might take a couple of coats to disguise that little bit of paint that's peeping through, because I used a primer on the base layer of some of these just to help the colour build up quicker. And it's just peeping through there. So I just do that all in one direction, like so. And see that I've got a little bit there actually. So I can just fix by hand by just using a square brush and going up to the edge, backwards and forwards, and just touch it in like that and get away with just the odd bit like that, but not maybe a big patch. Really easy just to spot fix little areas just to perfect them. Now the other thing is if I want to touch up some of the black areas, just take a little bit of that, flat square brush, and I can just come in here and it's a bit like cutting in, use the ends of the brush just to get a much sharper line where things have maybe just go. Saves a little bit of time over taping everything off, but it depends how steady your hand is. But if you do it this way rather than that way, you can just go in up to the line, get a smooth, and remove any of those little bits. Yeah. If you have a bit of paint that pulls up when you take your tape off, leaving you with a bare patch, perhaps when you're taking off, you've painted the purple over the black, you pull the tape back and it pulls some of the base layer back. It's really easy to fix that. So again, I'd take a small piece of sandpaper, and wherever that patch is, you don't have to take it all back and feel like the whole thing's ruined, is to sand that spot. So again, you might mask off the areas around it that you don't want to accidentally scratch. Mask off that, sand smooth that area as much as you can. Now you're going to have to sand a slightly bigger area to get it very smooth. It needs to feel absolutely smooth to your fingertips. So I use the 180 grit like this, and then I get a synthetic sanding pad just to add that finer sort of finish on it, and then I can paint it back in with the black. If you find that you're getting too much of a dip, so maybe you had quite thick layers of paint on to start with, then you might need to sort of build it up over more coats, but you should be able to spot fix little pull-ups like that just by taping it off, sanding it back, and often the reason that it has pulled off in that spot is because you'll find that the area underneath is shiny, so it might be a little part that you've missed in your prep, and so by sanding it, you're sort of readying it to take the paint again. Unfortunately, if your prep has missed a spot, you might find that patch that you're sanding will grow. Don't worry, just go for it. You'll have to get off anything that's not sticking down properly anyway. So sand it back, smooth as you can to your fingertips so you don't feel any bump where there's between the bare patch and the painted patch. Smooth as you can, and then repaint, and it should be fine.